Yeah, well, music was always an ongoing thing at college. In fact, most of the bands of the 60s were formed out of colleges. I mean, it's true with the Beatles, it's true with the Stones.
Yeah.
The Animals started as a tight group of working-class musicians from Newcastle, pushing through small clubs with raw energy and a sound that quickly caught attention. But behind the success, something very different was happening inside the band. Join us as we uncover the hidden conflicts behind one of rock's most intense breakups. First, fault lines. The story of the Animals begins in Newcastle in the late 1950s, a place shaped by heavy industry, docks, and long working days. Life there was not easy, and that reality influenced the kind of music young musicians wanted to play. In 1958, a small group of local players came together and formed what was first known as the Alan Price Rhythm and Blues Combo. At this stage, they were not famous, and they were not trying to be pop stars. They were just trying to play music that felt real to them and to the people around them. Their sound was deeply influenced by American rhythm and blues. Artists like early blues singers and guitar players from the United States gave them a style that felt honest and emotional. But instead of copying it directly, they shaped it into something rougher and more grounded in their own environment. Newcastle's working-class energy gave their music a heavier and more urgent feel. It was not polished, and that was exactly the point. At the center of the group was Alan Price. He was serious about music and had a clear sense of structure. He liked things organized and controlled, and he often guided how the group's sound should be shaped. Alongside him was Hilton Valentine, who was quieter but very skilled on guitar. He did not speak much, but his playing added a strong musical foundation that the group depended on. On bass was Chaz Chandler, who was more practical than the others. He often thought about how the group could survive and grow, not just musically, but also in terms of opportunities. Behind the drums was John Steele, who kept a steady rhythm and avoided conflict when possible. Together, they formed a tight unit built on local gigs and small club performances. At this early stage, the group was still focused on survival. They played wherever they could, often for workers who wanted loud, emotional music at the end of a hard day. But even in these early years, differences started to appear. Some members wanted to stay true to the raw blues style they loved, while others began thinking about how the band could become more successful and reach wider audiences. Things changed in 1962 when Eric Burdon joined the group. His arrival completely shifted the band's direction. Before him, the group was mostly instrumental, built around keyboards and rhythm. With Burdon, everything became centered around a voice. His singing style was powerful, emotional, and full of intensity. It immediately changed how the group sounded and how they were seen. But this change also created imbalance. Alan Price was used to having strong control over the music, while Burdon brought a louder and more emotional presence that naturally pulled attention toward the front of the stage. This created tension almost right away. Some members wanted to keep a structured, arranged sound, while others wanted more freedom and raw expression. These early disagreements were not full conflicts yet, but they planted the first seeds of division. The band was no longer just a small local group trying to survive. It was becoming a creative mix of strong personalities with very different ideas about music and direction. And as success slowly began to appear on the horizon, those small differences were only going to grow much larger in the years ahead. Burdon versus Price versus Chandler. As the Animals started to grow beyond small clubs in Newcastle, their internal balance began to change. What once felt like a close group of musicians slowly turned into a band with different leaders pulling in different directions. This is where the real power struggles began, and it mainly centered around three key figures: Eric Burdon, Alan Price, and Chaz Chandler. Each of them had a different idea of what the band should become. Alan Price started taking the role of musical director. He was the one who focused on structure, arrangements, and how songs should be built. For Price, the music needed to be controlled and carefully shaped. He believed that discipline and musical planning were the way forward. This gave him a strong influence over the band's sound, especially in the studio. On the other side was Eric Burdon. His focus was very different. Burdon was all about feeling, emotion, and energy. He wanted the music to be raw and powerful, especially in live performances. His voice carried intensity, and he pushed the band toward a more expressive blues style. This often clashed with Price's more structured approach, because Burdon wanted freedom, while Price wanted control. Then there was Chas Chandler. Unlike the other two, Chandler was not as focused on musical direction. He became more concerned with survival and success. He started thinking about contracts, money, and how the band could stay stable in a tough industry. While he still played bass, his mindset slowly shifted toward the business side of things. This added another layer to the group's internal tension. As the band began getting attention, the issue of control of sound became more serious. Everyone started realizing that whoever controlled the music also controlled the band's future. Price often shaped the arrangements, Burdon shaped the performance style, and Chandler watched how everything translated into opportunity and income. This division created frustration because no one person fully controlled everything, yet everyone felt they should have more influence. At the same time, outside forces began to enter their world. One of the most important was producer Mickey Most. He saw the band as a product that could be shaped for commercial success. Most pushed for polished recordings and hit-friendly songs. This approach worked for radio play and record sales, but it created tension inside the band because it limited their creative freedom. This led to a clear clash of philosophies. Burdon and others who valued blues roots wanted raw, emotional performances that felt real. The producer and parts of the industry wanted cleaner, shorter, more structured songs that could reach wider audiences. Price often stood somewhere in the middle, trying to balance musical quality with what would actually get released. During rehearsals and live shows, communication started to break down. Arguments over song structure, tempo, and arrangement became more frequent. Decisions were no longer made easily or together. Instead, they became contested discussions where each member pushed their own vision. Even small disagreements began to feel personal. Over time, trust started to weaken. The band was still performing well, but behind the scenes, members were starting to question each other's motives. Instead of moving forward as one unit, they were slowly becoming separate voices inside the same group, each pulling in a different direction. This period did not break the band yet, but it created the early cracks that would later become much deeper problems. And what happened next would turn those cracks into something much bigger than anyone expected. House of the Rising Sun. By 1964, the Animals had already built a strong live reputation, but nothing they had done before came close to what happened during the recording of House of the Rising Sun. This was the moment that changed everything for the band, both in a good way and in a deeply damaging way. The recording took place at Delane Lee Studios in London. The band came in with a version of an old folk song they had been performing on stage for a while. It was not new, but their version was different. It was slower, darker, and more emotional than most songs of the time. The group recorded it in a single take. There was no long studio polishing or repeated attempts. They played it straight through, and what came out of that session became one of the most important songs of the 1960s. The performance had a strong sense of urgency. Eric Burdon delivered the vocals with deep emotion, giving the song its haunting feel. Alan Price shaped the organ arrangement, which became one of the most recognizable parts of the track. The rest of the band supported the structure tightly, creating a sound that felt complete and powerful in a very short time. But even during this success, there was a problem forming in the background. The issue was not the music itself, but how credit for the song would be assigned. The band had already arranged the song together, but when it came time to list the writing and arrangement credit, only Alan Price's name was used. The official explanation given at the time was that there was not enough space on the record label to list all the names. It was presented as a simple technical limitation, something minor and harmless. However, the decision had major consequences. Because Alan Price was listed as the sole credited arranger, all songwriting royalties went directly to him. Every time the song was played on the radio or sold as a record, the money flowed to Price alone. The rest of the band members did not receive songwriting income. Instead, they were paid as performers, receiving session-style payments rather than long-term royalties. This created an immediate imbalance within the group. The song became a massive hit almost instantly, but the financial rewards were not shared equally. The situation was especially painful because Eric Burdon's voice had become the most recognizable part of the band's identity. Yet he received no writing credit or royalty share from the song that defined them. Chas Chandler also began to feel uneasy about how things were handled. He started questioning how decisions like this were made and whether the band was being treated fairly by management and the industry. The success of the song did not bring unity. Instead, it raised more questions about control, ownership, and fairness. At the same time, House of the Rising Sun was becoming a global hit. It topped charts in the UK and the United States and made the Animals international stars. But behind the scenes, the emotional impact on the band was very different. What should have been a shared victory turned into a private source of tension and resentment. The song marked a turning point. It proved that the Animals could reach the highest level of success. But it also showed how quickly that success could divide them when money and credit were not shared equally. From this point forward, nothing in the band would feel the same again. And as the fame grew even bigger, the cracks inside the group would start to widen even further. Success without control. After the success of House of the Rising Sun, the Animals quickly became part of the British invasion wave. Their rise was fast and intense. One moment, they were playing clubs in Newcastle and London, and the next, they were touring across the United States, appearing on major stages, and being treated as international stars. But while their fame grew quickly, their control over their own career did not grow with it. A major part of their career was managed by Mike Jeffrey. On the surface, he helped guide the band through a complicated industry and secured important deals. But over time, concerns began to grow inside the group. The band members started feeling that financial information was not fully clear. Contracts were signed, large amounts of money were reported, but the actual payments reaching the band did not always match expectations. There were increasing accusations of financial manipulation and lack of transparency. The band did not fully understand where all the money was going, and explanations were often unclear or incomplete. This created suspicion among members, especially as the band became more successful and more money was being generated. At the same time, creative control was also being taken out of their hands. Producer Mickey Most played a major role in shaping their releases. He often pushed the band toward using songs written by external professional songwriters instead of their own material. While this approach helped produce hits and kept them on the charts, it frustrated the band deeply. They felt they were being turned into performers of other people's work, rather than creators of their own music. This tension between commercial success and creative ownership became a constant issue. The band was achieving more success than ever, but many members felt disconnected from the music they were releasing. They were no longer fully involved in writing or shaping their songs, which made their role feel more controlled and less personal. On top of this, the touring schedule became extremely demanding. The Animals were constantly traveling between the UK, the United States, and later Japan. They performed almost non-stop, moving from one city to another with very little rest. The pressure of travel, combined with live performances and recording sessions, began to take a serious emotional toll on the group. During this period, signs of exhaustion started to appear. Some members began using drugs and alcohol more heavily, partly as a way to cope with the stress and constant movement. The lifestyle was fast, unstable, and difficult to manage, especially for a group that had only recently come from working-class backgrounds. Financial confusion added another layer of tension. The band signed large contracts, and reports suggested they were earning significant amounts of money. However, the actual payments they received were often unclear. Members began to question whether earnings were being delayed, reduced, or diverted through management channels. These doubts were never fully resolved, and they continued to grow over time. As money increased, trust inside the band decreased. Instead of bringing the group closer together, success highlighted differences and suspicions. Members began to argue more often about fairness, control, and responsibility. What had once been a shared journey now felt divided into separate interests. The band was now in a strange position. They were more famous than ever, but they were also losing control over their music, their money, and even their unity. And as pressure continued to build, the cracks inside the group were about to turn into full breakpoints. Alan Price exits. By 1965, the Animals were at the peak of their fame. They were touring internationally, selling records in large numbers, and becoming one of the key names of the British invasion. On the surface, everything looked successful. But inside the band, tension had been building for a long time. That pressure finally broke when Alan Price decided to leave the group. The official reason given for his departure was fear of flying and general exhaustion from constant touring. The schedule had been intense, with non-stop travel across countries and repeated live performances. These explanations made sense on the surface, especially given how demanding the lifestyle had become. However, inside the band, many believed there was a deeper reason behind his decision. A major issue was the growing financial imbalance caused by the success of House of the Rising Sun. Because Price was the only credited arranger on the song, he was receiving the majority of the songwriting royalties. Over time, this created a serious gap in earnings between him and the rest of the band. While all members contributed to the group's success, only Price was benefiting from its biggest hit in a long-term financial way. This created resentment that never fully went away. The other members felt that the situation was unfair, especially since the song had become their defining success and global breakthrough. As pressure built, relationships inside the group became more strained. When Price left, the reaction from the remaining members was not calm. Chas Chandler was especially vocal. He both publicly and privately accused Price of betrayal. From Chandler's point of view, leaving at the height of success while still benefiting from royalty income felt like abandoning the group during a critical moment. These accusations deepened the divide between Price and the rest of the band. After Price's departure, the band faced immediate instability. Finding the right replacement for a keyboardist who had been central to their sound was not easy. Temporary musicians were brought in at first, but the chemistry was not the same. Eventually, a permanent replacement was added, but the shift changed the band's dynamic in a noticeable way. The emotional impact on Eric Burdon was also significant. Price had been a key musical partner in shaping the band's early sound. With him gone, Burdon lost an important anchor in the group's creative structure. The balance between arrangement and performance became less stable, and Burdon's role as frontman became even more dominant. As a result, the band's identity started to shift. Instead of functioning as a tight, collective unit where each member played an equal role, the Animals slowly became centered around Burden's voice and presence. The group became more like a rotating lineup built around a single frontman, rather than a stable band of equals. From this point forward, resentment between Price and the remaining members did not fade. It became a permanent part of their history, shaping how they viewed each other in later years. Even after the success continued, the emotional damage from this split remained unresolved. And after losing one of their founding pillars, the band was about to face even deeper instability in the years ahead. Breakdown of the original Animals. After Alan Price left the group, the Animals were already unstable, but things became even worse over the next year. Between 1965 and 1966, the original version of the band slowly fell apart, both as a musical unit and as a working relationship. What had once been a tight group from Newcastle was now becoming a fractured set of individuals dealing with confusion, frustration, and mistrust. One of the next major losses was John Steele. His departure added another gap in the original lineup. Steele had always been one of the more steady and less confrontational members, but even he could not remain in a situation where uncertainty and internal tension were increasing. With his exit, another part of the original foundation was gone. At this stage, the band was no longer functioning as the original group that had formed in Newcastle. The remaining members were still performing under the same name, but the structure was different. Instead of a unified band, it was becoming a shifting lineup where original members were gradually replaced or outnumbered by new musicians. This change affected both the sound and the internal trust within the group. Behind the scenes, financial concerns were becoming more serious. There were growing claims that promised payouts to band members were not being delivered as expected. Contracts had been signed during their rise to fame, and large sums of money were reported in deals, but the actual payments reaching the musicians were unclear. Some members began to believe that money was being held back or redirected through complex financial arrangements. There were also claims and suspicions about missing funds and offshore accounts linked to management. While not always proven in detail, these concerns created a strong sense of mistrust. The band no longer felt confident that their earnings were being handled fairly or transparently. This uncertainty became a major source of conflict. Chaz Chandler began to take a more active role in trying to understand what was happening financially. He reportedly attempted to investigate where the band's money was going and looked for bank accounts that were supposed to hold earnings from their success. However, finding clear answers proved difficult. The financial system around the band was complicated, and explanations were often incomplete or unclear. At the same time, disputes between record labels and management continued to grow. Contracts were being renegotiated, but trust between all parties was weakening. The band was still releasing music, but the environment around those releases was tense and unstable. Even recording sessions began to feel strained because members were no longer fully confident in the system behind them. The final singles from the original era were released during this period, but they were created under very different conditions compared to earlier work. The sense of unity that had defined the band at the beginning was no longer there. Instead, each release felt more like an obligation than a shared creative effort. By 1966, the original lineup of the Animals had effectively dissolved. The group name continued, but the original members were no longer working together in any meaningful way. What remained was a brand with rotating musicians and a history of success that no longer reflected the reality inside the band. Relationships between former members also changed. Communication became limited, and in some cases, completely stopped. Where there had once been collaboration and shared ambition, there was now silence and resentment. And with the original band fully broken apart, a completely new version of the Animals was about to emerge, bringing a very different sound and even more instability. The second Animals. After the original lineup of the Animals broke apart, the band did not disappear completely. Instead, it was rebuilt under a new direction led by Eric Burdon. This new phase became known as Eric Burdon and the Animals, and it marked a major shift in both sound and identity. Unlike the earlier version of the group, this was not a stable band formed from longtime friends or original members. It was built with a completely new lineup of musicians. The original members were gone, and Burdon essentially became the only link between the old group and the new one. Everything else changed. The most noticeable change was in the music style. The band moved away from their earlier British R&B and blues sound. Instead, they started exploring psychedelic and progressive rock. The songs became longer, more experimental, and more focused on atmosphere and storytelling rather than simple structure. This shift reflected the changing music scene of the late 1960s, but it also showed Burdon's desire to move in a new creative direction. During this period, several talented musicians joined and left the lineup. Some of the key names included Andy Summers, Vic Briggs, and Zoot Money. Each brought different skills and styles, but none stayed for very long. The lineup changed frequently, which made it hard for the group to develop a stable identity. Despite the instability, this version of the Animals still produced successful songs. Tracks like San Francisco Nights and Sky Pilot became well known during this era. San Francisco Nights reflected the growing influence of American West Coast culture on the band's new sound. Sky Pilot was even more ambitious, stretching into long, structured sections and dealing with heavy themes. These songs showed that Burdon was willing to take creative risks and push beyond the band's earlier style. However, behind the success, internal problems continued. The constant changes in musicians made it difficult for the group to build strong chemistry. Every time a new member joined, the sound shifted slightly, and the group had to adjust again. This created a lack of consistency, both in the studio and on stage. During this same period, Burdon's personal life also became more unstable. His increasing drug use began to affect his focus and reliability. This did not completely stop the band from working, but it added another layer of unpredictability. Sessions could vary in energy and direction depending on his condition, and this affected how smoothly the group functioned. The identity of the band became split in two. On one side was the original Animals, remembered for their raw blues sound and tight group structure. On the other side was Eric Burdon and the Animals, a more experimental and shifting project centered around one frontman. There was no clear connection between the two versions anymore, except for the name. Importantly, there was no reconciliation with the original members during this time. Alan Price, Chaz Chandler, Hilton Valentine, and John Steele remained separate from Burdon's new direction. The distance between them only grew, with no effort to rebuild the original unity. By the end of this period, the Animals had effectively become two different stories sharing the same name, one rooted in the past and one constantly changing in the present. And as this second version of the band pushed forward, it was about to face its most chaotic and dangerous moment yet. Japan Crisis. By 1968, the second version of the Animals, led by Eric Burdon, was already unstable. The lineup kept changing, the sound kept shifting, and trust inside the group was weak. But what finally ended this phase of the band was not just internal tension. It was a series of external events that pushed everything over the edge, especially a disastrous tour in Japan. During the Japan tour of 1968, the situation quickly turned serious. The band had arrived with expectations of a normal international run of shows, but conflicts with promoters escalated far beyond what anyone expected. The dispute grew so intense that it reportedly involved organized crime groups linked to local entertainment networks. What began as a business disagreement turned into a dangerous situation where pressure was placed on the people managing the tour. The band's manager was allegedly threatened and forced into signing a debt agreement under intense pressure. The amount involved was reported as a way to cover losses caused by delays and scheduling issues. The situation became frightening and unpredictable, and the band realized they were in an environment they could not control. As the pressure increased, the decision was made to leave Japan immediately. The group abandoned equipment and instruments behind in order to escape the situation as quickly as possible. The departure was sudden and chaotic, marking one of the most stressful moments in the band's history. For many members, it was not just a business failure, but a deeply unsettling personal experience. The psychological impact of this event was significant. The stress and fear from the Japan incident added to existing tensions inside the group. It became harder for the members to continue working together under such unstable conditions. Shortly after returning, the second version of the band, Eric Burdon and the Animals, effectively collapsed in 1968. After the breakup, the members went in different directions. Chaz Chandler left performing behind and moved into artist management, where he later played a major role in shaping the career of other major musicians. Eric Burdon continued performing as a solo artist and worked with several short-term collaborations, but none lasted long enough to recreate the stability of earlier years. Other former members, including session musicians and replacements from both versions of the band, moved into smaller roles in the music industry or local performances. The original members of the Animals had already been living separate lives, but occasional reunions did happen later. In 1975, and again in 1983, the original lineup came together for recordings and tours. These reunions brought attention and nostalgia, but they did not repair the deeper issues between them. Financial disagreements, especially related to earlier royalties, were never fully resolved. Emotional distance also remained, and the cooperation felt more professional than personal. In 1994, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a major recognition of their influence. However, the moment highlighted their divisions rather than healing them. Eric Burdon chose not to attend the ceremony, instead performing at a separate scheduled show in Germany. The remaining original members accepted the honor without him, standing together without the full group present. This moment became symbolic of the band's long-term situation. Even at one of their highest points of recognition, they could not come together as a complete unit. The earlier conflicts over money, control, and trust were never fully repaired. In the end, the relationships between members remained distant. Communication became rare, and in many cases, completely stopped. What remained was a shared history, but not a shared present. And as time passed, the story of the Animals became less about unity and more about what was permanently broken long before the fame ever faded. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the real story behind the music, hit that like button, subscribe for more band histories, and drop a comment with what story you want next.